Good afternoon and welcome to the Credit Reporting Best Practices webinar by Equifax. We're going to begin our broadcast in just a moment. Okay, and once again, welcome. My name is Angelica Jeffries, and I'm co-presenting today with Jennifer Reed, and we want to thank you for attending our webinar today. This is the Equifax Credit Reporting Best Practices webinar, and we are going to be talking about the best practices for becoming an Equifax credit data furnisher. That said, I want to make sure to emphasize that this presentation is not intended to be legal advice. If you're seeking legal advice, of course, if you need advice about compliance for your dealership, please seek out a professional in the area you need specific advice and guidance in. So let's take a quick run through the agenda for our call today. The first thing we're going to do is talk about our collaboration with NIADA and NABD, which is something we're very, very excited about and proud of. Then we'll share some really interesting findings from a survey we conducted of buy here, pay here dealers. Next, we're going to talk about the benefits of becoming a data furnisher for buy here, pay here dealers. And then we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the credit process itself, the governing bodies and regulations you really want to make sure that you're aware of if you decide to become a data furnisher. It's really important, of course, that you have a good understanding of the regulatory landscape if you just choose to head down this path. And then we're going to dive into what really is the meat of the presentation, which is the process itself and how to furnish your credit data to Equifax. We'll also talk about the support and the resources that you'll have available to you. And then finally, we'll open it up for questions in our chat window. If you look at your GoToWebinar chat dashboard, there is a section there where you can submit questions. Now, feel free to submit them throughout the presentation. However, we'll more than likely answer the questions you might have, so you might want to hold them or jot them down and then enter them into the chat window when we get to the section around the questions. So as I mentioned, I'm co-presenting today with Jen Reed, and I want to turn the next slide over to Jen, because Jen, you were really heavily engaged and really responsible from the Equifax side for our collaboration with the association. So first of all, thank you for your hard work in that area. But why don't you give us a little history around how we got here today?
Sure. Thanks, Angelica. I appreciate that. And again, thanks everybody for joining. Well, it was actually just over a year ago at the NABD conference that we heard loud and clear from the segment that there was a lot of concern and a perception that the credit reporting agencies did not want the data, and there was a lot of restrictions, and the process was so burdensome that, quite frankly, most dealers weren't able to get through the process. So we took that back and reflected, and certainly couldn't be further from the truth that, you know, consumers' credit information is a critical piece that we do want to have. So we actually established and developed relationships with both NABD and NIADA to help guide us through this journey and really help us develop a pilot and a process to be able to give buy here, pay here dealers who did want to report trade lines a path and a way to do it and do it safely. So I think one of the things that I would love to pass today is that we heard you. Certainly we want that data. We have an obligation, obviously, to make sure that what goes on is accurate. So what we have done is we are obviously partnering, and we have developed education and collaboration with the association. And as such, we've gone ahead and actually removed the minimum number of trade lines for association members. And just for those that aren't aware, there was previously a 500 account minimum that we had in place. So we have gone ahead and removed that for association members and continue to stay heavily in collaboration with the associations to make sure that this is a process that is fair for everybody and make sure ultimately the consumer information that we put on our file is accurate. So with that, there was a lot of voice of the market that we got. And Angelica, why don't you talk a little bit about the pilot that we did in collaboration with the association?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jen. And again, thanks for helping us get here today. So I think some of the directional information we also based our decision to open this up on was based on a survey that we conducted of buy here, pay here dealers, and we had a lot of help from Ken Chilson over at NABD, which I'm sure many of you who I'm sure you're very familiar with. But what we wanted to do is get some feedback and clarity from buy here, pay here dealers around the credit landscape. Do they pull credit? Why or why not? How do they use it in their decisioning? And we actually had a great response to the survey. We've got some of the feedback that we gathered right up here on the screen. But we had good representation of states across the country. 43 out of 50 states were represented. And what we found was that a good chunk of the respondents, the people that responded to the survey, the dealers, were on the upper end of the curve in terms of credit file usage. They understood that it was really important to pull a credit report to assess the risk when they're evaluating whether or not to loan money to a consumer for an auto loan. But the other thing is these dealers tended to be a little bit larger, a little bit more progressive. And we found that they are the ones who are also reporting their data to the credit reporting agency. 64% of them, in fact, report their data. So we interpreted this to be indicative of the way that the industry is moving. In other words, if progressive, larger dealers are reporting their data, it's only a matter of time before more businesses follow suit, and we wanted to remove the barriers for smaller dealers to go ahead and furnish their data so they are able to follow suit. And of course, when you head down this road, there are pros and cons, of course. And I think, Jen, you have done a lot of research in this area as well. So maybe we can just quickly run through, if I'm a buy here, pay here dealer, what are some of the reasons, whether I'm big or small, that I'd want to furnish my data to a credit reporting agency?
Sure, and I think it's a really important sort of thing for each dealership to think through that and understand the importance of this to their dealership, because it is a commitment. But really first, I think it's important to call out that it's a compelling value proposition for customers to help them build their credit. It's no secret that this segment obviously is typically dealing with a customer that is credit challenged, had some financial hardship, or is just getting started out. So one of the key things is to say we're going to help them get established and on the right path. And one of the things we've heard anecdotally from an industry perspective is that folks can understand that there's high rates within the space, but the customer needs to ultimately be able to benefit from that loan. So it really is important to put the customer first in all of this. It provides incentive for the consumers to pay their payments on time, and certainly for behaviorally can help encourage them to prioritize this, at the beginning of the line when they know that there's a consequence for it, not making that payment. It mitigates consumer fraud and strategic repossession. We heard lots of stories throughout the pilot of where dealers were actually educating consumers to not pay the car loan off and just hand back the keys to the buy here, pay here dealership. And that was made possible because the information, quite frankly, wasn't on the credit report. So many lenders were able to offer approvals unaware that there was a current obligation out there. It enables accurate risk assessment, and then there's certainly, with the heightened regulatory scrutiny right now, no time better than to look at incorporating this into your process, because it is certainly something we've heard over the last year that there's focus within the space on this topic. And quite frankly, as Angelica mentioned, just to stay competitive. Many of your competitors are likely reporting or going to be reporting, and it's something that you want to look at from a competitive standpoint to offer customers. But now that we've talked about the benefits, I think it's important to make sure we dive in a little deeper to the regulations and understand, why it's important for the industry to really take proactive steps to make sure consumers are treated fairly with this process. Because quite frankly, right now, there is the risk of that broad sweeping regulations and actions being taken, and certainly something that the industry cannot afford is more negative press around the consumer and the consumer experience. So let's cover the government agencies just and some of the high-level regulations so that you have some familiarity with that. There's three primary governing bodies to oversee the use of credit data. The key one that we've heard a lot about lately is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and this is the current primary regulator of the CRAs and the creditors. And really their focus is, as it relates to this topic, is on data quality, deceptive practices, discrimination, outdated regulations, and then the enforcement of consumer protection laws. There's the Federal Trade Commission, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and this was the former primary regulator of the CRA, and this actually, their authority was transferred mid-2010 under the Dodd-Frank Act reform to the Consumer Protection, under the Consumer Protection Act over to the CFPB. So they still work together, and they still certainly are out there, but the CFPB has become much more prevalent and certainly much more in the spotlight. Then from a proactive perspective, our industry association is the Consumer Data Industry Association, and this association represents the CRAs to the federal and the state legislators in addition to the media. And they really are there to help set the industry reporting guidelines, educate members, and really fill a critical need as it relates to promoting and educating the body. And they have a website that provides a lot of valuable information and insights. So if you're looking for additional information, this is the organization that we would certainly point you to gain additional education opportunities. And we'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. So some of the primary regulations that govern the use of credit data is the Fair Credit Reporting Act, also known as FCRA. And this regulates how creditors and CRAs use the consumer credit information. There's the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act, or FACTA, and this helps consumers protect themselves or respond to identity theft. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act was enacted to help protect consumers' personal financial information, which is held by financial institutions. And then you have various forms of state legislation that is designed to also protect consumers. Hey, Angelica, FCRA is a regulation that we hear a lot about. How about we cover that with a little bit more detail?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And for those of you on the call, there was a very recent action against a dealer in Texas where the FTC stepped in and gave a decision and had placed some heavy fines against a dealer for not following the guidelines for policies and procedures. Well, at least that was one of the penalties for the dealer. So we're certainly not going to, again, here to provide legal advice, but what we will say from our observations that the easiest way to get into trouble is to not have a written policy and documented procedures to execute on those policies for your dealerships around the use of credit data. So you're really going to want to familiarize yourself with Appendix A to the Data Furnisher Rule, Part 660. Now again, not going to publish the whole thing here, and we're not going to go through the whole appendix, but we have extracted a full bullets just to give you a flavor of the policies you're going to want to and frankly need to adhere to. And again, the biggest takeaway is document, document, document. So some of the things you're going to want to do is you need to make sure that your policies and procedures are appropriate to the nature, size, and complexity and scope of your activities. You should review them periodically. Once a quarter, take a look at your policies and procedures and make sure that they still match the scope and the activities taking place in your dealership. And you should ensure that information provided to the credit reporting agency is for the right person, reflects the terms of the account and the consumer's performance on the account. Now, there are companies out there that you can contact and work with to help you develop, and they have templates for policies and procedures that you can work within. But you really should become familiar with these guidelines yourself. Another takeaway, a few more takeaways here on this slide. The biggest takeaway here is that you're required to keep maintenance of your records for a reasonable amount of time. Now, a good rule of thumb here is to emulate your standard record-keeping policies. I believe it's 7 years. Most legal advice and tax accountants will tell you keep your tax records for 7 years. While the statute says 5 years for the FCRA, I would just emulate your standard record-keeping policies as a good rule of thumb. So with that, let's move into the actual process for starting to furnish your data or becoming a data furnisher. We've got this slide up here really to illustrate that before training, very complicated. After training, certainly much easier to navigate. We want to stress it's not an easy process, period. But it will be much more complex for you because you will have a clear path in understanding how to navigate and how to set up to become a furnisher and to stay a furnisher. And that's really the objective of our webinar today. So when you begin, one of the first things to understand is that you are required to comply with a few certain basic requirements. First of all across Equifax, there is a requirement for 500 active records, unless, once again, you are a member of NABD or NIADA. You can have as many records, 10, 15, 1,000, it doesn't matter. As long as you're a member in good standing, you can be a furnisher with Equifax. You will have to go through what's called a credentialing process. For those of you who pull Equifax credit reports currently, it will be a little less involved, and certainly as a credit reporting agency, we have an obligation to the government and to make sure that when we're extending access to credit or access to furnished credit, you have a legitimate business and a legitimate reason to be accessing credit. But the good news is, as I said, if you pull credit reports, the process is simplified and you might not necessarily need to have someone come out and examine your business. In any case, it shouldn't take much more than 30 to 60 days to complete the whole process. Your submissions have to be submitted in something called a Metro 2 format. Jen is actually going to talk a little bit more about Metro 2 in a little bit, so we'll move on to the next bullet, but understand that you do need to make sure that your data is sent in a Metro 2 standard. And the last piece on this slide is ensuring that your entire portfolio is submitted at minimum once a month. Now, you might want to send your credit data more frequently than that, depending on your business model. So, for example, if you collect payments from your customer every 2 weeks, you might want to just update your files with us every 2 weeks. But at minimum, it's got to be once a month, and you have to send all of your records when you upload your files. The other reason it's really important is whatever time frame you decide to send your file, make sure it's the same time frame and you develop a rhythm and the cadence. Don't do it once every 2 weeks, 1 month, and then skip it and go to another month. And the biggest reason for that, guys and girls, is that you will have a relationship with your data analyst here at Equifax, and you will become you'll have a rhythm with them, and very often they might notice if you are out of sync or out of cycle with your updates and reach out and say, hey, what happened? We didn't get your file, right? And that's the kind of relationship we want to make sure that you have. But again, at minimum, please just make sure that you have to report at least once a month. Now, when you send us your file, there are a couple of different ways you can do that. You can transmit your file and upload it through ePort. Many of you might know ePort is the Equifax platform where you can access credit reports. You can also pull instant verifications of income and employment through our Work Number product if you want to verify the income of your customer. Or you can check with your DMS system. Some DMS systems have a direct connection right to Equifax and they can transmit the data. So either way, you decide what works best for you. And then finally, eOscar is a tool that you're also going to need to utilize. And actually, Jen, why don't I turn it back over to you to talk about both eOscar and Metro 2.
Sure. Thanks, Angelica. So Metro 2 is the format used to report payments to all 3 major consumer reporting agencies. So the good news is by using this format and leveraging it, you're actually able to use it for all 3. It ensures that the information is consistent, complete, and timely, which is obviously really critical when you're talking about a consumer's credit report. It meets all requirements of the Fair Credit Billing Act, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which again is very critical given today's regulatory environment. It allows the credit information to be consistently put on the file and make sure that it's making it to the right consumer file, which is obviously going to help prevent unnecessary disputes. It enables cycle reporting of data to keep the file fresh and current, and then it allows 24 months of payment history to be supplied so that lenders and credit grantors are able to go in and get that sort of historical view of how that consumer's performed. Then another critical piece is the eOscar system. So eOscar is a web-based Metro 2 compliant automated system that enables data furnishers and credit reporting agencies to create and respond to consumer credit history disputes. So simply put, this is the system that we're going to communicate with you when a consumer comes to us and has a dispute. This enables the out-of-cycle credit history updates to credit reporting agencies. And the disputes are initiated by the FCRA on behalf of the consumer, and these will ultimately be routed to you to be able to initiate sort of the investigation and to be able to put updated information. And it's really critical that if something's modified or deleted, it also will enable the communication to get the updated on the other reports. From an eOscar perspective, one of the critical things is that it may not be used to add or create a record on the consumer's file or substitute for that monthly or whatever cycle you pick reporting. And I'll be pretty transparent here, guys. You know, this is something that in the past has been abused, and certainly something we don't want to risk the program from a perspective where accounts are put onto a customer's report that are accurate. So I ask everybody to make sure that whatever is being transmitted is the loan and the information that you have in the system. If you need additional information about eOscar, such as the registration or the billing and training, it's available at the address that's displayed on the screen, and we'll certainly be showing this later. But it really is something that's critical that you make sure you go ahead and get registered for as you start the process. One of the other tools that we heard and we learned through the pilot was very beneficial was automated data view. And what this is an online customer service tool that will actually allow you to look at the data and see the data the way the customer sees it. And so, for example, when you see collections or trade line information that the customer may be disputing, you can actually go in real time and see the same information. This was a pain point that we heard loud and clear through the pilot and have gotten very positive responses from dealers that have started using this tool and solution. It also allows you to audit and use for verification purposes, and you can use it for ongoing monitoring of your data. So it really is neat because you can actually see your data and start to dig into it to a level of granularity you may not have been able to before. So with that, hey Angelica, we talked a little bit about CDIA earlier. Do you want to dive in a little deeper?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And just to expand a little bit on that, guys, just like you have NIADA and NABD, we at Equifax and Experian and TransUnion have the CDIA. They are our trade association. And one of the best practices that we found throughout the pilot is they offer an education program for any data furnisher, in this case for your dealership. And what the best practice really is identify someone capable on your staff, whether that's you or one or two people that you know are going to be handling the data and will have an understanding of how important it really is to be accurate and educated when handling the data. And so this certificate program is about an 8 or 9 hour class that you can take online, and you can break it up in segments. And the cost is only $95 per person in order to take the class and become certified. And the certification lasts for 2 years. And one of the best practices, as we found, is to just print that certificate out and have it included in your compliance manuals. So best practice certainly to take advantage of that training for as many individuals in your dealership as you think is appropriate and will be handling the data. There's another resource available through the CDIA, and Jen, why don't you chat a little bit more about the credit reporting resource guide?
Sure. We certainly got last year a lot of questions, particularly about reporting, particularly around things like voluntary surrenders, repossessions. So what I encourage everybody, and one common denominator that I found in a lot of those questions were people weren't aware of this resource guide. So it's something that comes out every year. It's about third, fourth quarter, and you want to make sure that you have this guide handy, and certainly will help navigate through a lot of those questions and really give you some specific scenarios on how things should be reported. So I definitely stress to everybody, something that you want to make sure you do is get through the process is go ahead and get this resource guide. And what will happen is in the process, when you go to start and get set up, we'll actually give you a code that you go in and download this guide from the CDIA. So definitely a tool that's worth having. And for those of you on the call that may already be reporting, if you're not familiar with this guide, definitely reach out to us at the resources we talked to at the end to get that information so we can make sure that you get a copy of that. So now that we've talked a little bit about the resources and the regulations and some other information about the pilot, how about we talk about, Angelica, just how they get set up?
Yeah, and let's recap so that we make sure that we go through all the steps. We've got this, what we call a data furnisher checklist for you so that you can refer back to it. The first thing that you really are once again going to do is establish that data furnishing membership with Equifax. We will give you an email address at the end of this session that will tell you exactly who to contact and how to go ahead and set that up so that you can get your reporting member number, the member number that Jen was just talking about that will allow you to get that CDIA resource guide. The next thing you're going to want to do is check with your DMS provider. A lot of the DMS providers in the independent dealer space have the ability to convert your data right over to Metro 2 format, and then they will send the file back to you so that you can upload it through either ePort or transmit it themselves. So check with your DMS provider. But if not, you'll want to go out and purchase the Metro 2 data software yourself. Then you're going to want to contact our support team and get registered for ePort. If you're going to be transmitting your data that way, that's also where you're going to access the ADV tool, which will allow you to review all your trade lines. And then finally, as we talked about, download a copy of that credit reporting resource guide. Exceptional piece of information for you to have. Plug it right up into your corkboard in your office and make sure you keep it handy. Once you've got all that straightened out, we are going to ask you to create a test file. And the goal here, guys, is that we're trying to make sure you don't hurt yourself. We're going to have dedicated data analysts to work with you to make sure that that test file is set up correctly. This is that Metro 2 formatted file that you're going to upload through ePort. And your data analyst is going to bounce that back and forth with you, hopefully not too many times, but as many times as is needed until it's correct. And once it's correct, you're going to sign off on it, and as soon as you sign off on it, now your trade lines will be showing in your consumer's credit reports, right? The other thing that you're going to want to do right away, as soon and hopefully prior to getting those files live and on the consumer credit files, is to register for eOscar. eOscar is that software that we talked about that allows you to respond to consumer disputes. Now, we've gotten a lot of questions about disputes and are they a negative thing or a positive thing. Guys, it's just like getting a complaint by phone or a negative review on a review site. You're going to want to reach out to the customer and respond and resolve the complaint. And in this case, you're just going to be doing it through the eOscar platform. Just keep in mind, however, that the entire process for responding to complaints needs to be completed within 30 days. So this is why we're saying get out there and get that eOscar software set up prior to your going live, because if a dispute comes in or a complaint comes in, you're going to want to get the process started so you complete it within 30 days. Okay, so Jen, now we've talked about how to become a data furnisher. Why don't you give our dealers some tips on how to stay a data furnisher?
Sure. Well, this is, I think, really important because you go through all of this to get set up. The last thing anybody wants is to have their file purged from the system. So really, we break it down into 3 critical steps that you do on a monthly basis, and that's submit a production-ready file each month. So again, you know, we talk about at least monthly, and certainly you can work with your data analyst on the frequency, but you want to make sure that you send it on a consistent basis. You respond to your disputes in the automated consumer dispute verification systems via eOscar, so again, critical step. And then monitor your data to confirm accurate transmission, and again, you can do this through automated data view, so you've got that monitoring component. You know, and as we previously mentioned, responding to the disputes is really one of the most important steps within the process of staying up and going, so we're going to dive a little deeper into that right now. And when I start looking at guidance and what sort of is expected for data furnishers, I look to the CFPB because they're ultimately the ones that are going to have an interest in if it's not being completed. So really the guidelines that are laid out by the FCRA are that you maintain a system reasonably capable of receiving the disputes from the CRAs and included the supporting documentation to be responded, and that's what eOscar does for you, so why it's such a critical step. Their expectation is that you're going to conduct a thorough investigation and you're going to go back and actually look to see if there's validity to the consumer's dispute. And then you want to make sure that you're reporting those results to the credit reporting agency that sent you the dispute. And then you want to provide that information to any of the CRAs that may have similar disputed information in the event that something does change or needs to be modified. And then, again, modifying or deleting any disputed information that's not accurate. One thing I want to note, everybody, is that as it relates to credit repair, there's certainly an industry out there that can, fraudulently dispute accounts. And it's something that I want to encourage everybody to make sure that you verify the accounts when you get that dispute and verify the accuracy. Because what will happen is they'll actually update that within the system, and then we won't continue to send you dispute letters if it's deemed from a fraudulent or from these credit repairs. So what will happen is the burden of proof will return to the consumer to provide the evidence that it's inaccurate. So definitely take the time to make sure that you verify any disputes that you get. It'll help prevent from the future letters or disputes coming to you. So with that, I know we got a lot of good learnings from the pilot. Angelica, would you like to take everybody through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, there were definitely some trailblazers who went before all the dealers on this call to iron out all the kinks in the process and make it as smooth as possible. These are the best practices that they shared with us that we want to share with you. So ultimately, designate a point person. It could be you, but it could be someone very capable in your dealership. You want to make sure somebody is responsible to be in charge of reporting and furnishing the data. And become good friends with your data analyst here at Equifax. We have resources dedicated to help you guys and make sure that you're taking all the necessary steps to be as accurate as possible. You want to participate, as we talked about, in the training programs if you can by the CDIA. Tremendous resource there, and again, familiarize yourself, with the credit reporting resource guide. The other things that you want to make sure is that you've got ongoing reviews and updates of your internal processes. We've talked about that earlier in the presentation. Participate in a Metro 2 workshop. Even though you are just either going to rely on your DMS or convert the file by way of the Metro 2 software, there's a lot of good learnings in the workshop, and the CDIA can provide you with times and places where you can register for that online. Check your audit and your prior reports and corrections using the automated data view, and notify your data analyst in advance of account numbers. And finally, we want to just bring up on the screen here the contact person who is dedicated to helping you get set up, and that is Madison Crawford. Madison Crawford is our new furnisher relationship coordinator. She is going to be available to you after this call. You'll want to jot down her email address. If you're interested in becoming a data furnisher, you're just going to email Madison. And we've also got up here, just in an aggregate form, the CDIA website, the eOscar platform, and the Equifax ePort system in terms of the websites that you'll need to. So I'll leave that screen up for a moment and let you jot down those web addresses. And then finally, we're going to open it up for questions through the questions box or the chat window. Again, ultimately, we want to just stress that our goal here is to help create a process that is transparent. We understand it's complex, but if you follow the checklist and the step we've outlined for you, you'll be on the right path in no time in helping consumers while growing your business. Now, one thing that we've also done in the GoToWebinar section of the software, there's a button, or there should be a button, that's called Handouts. What we've done there is we've uploaded for you our quick start guide for furnishers. I'll pull it up on the screen here so you can see what it looks like. It is actually a very comprehensive guide that will pretty much walk through everything that we just talked about, including being able to download a much more detailed resource guide, which I'll pull up here for you. Essentially just running through all the information we talked about, phone numbers, web addresses, everything that you're going to need to get started, where to buy Metro 2 software if you need it, and ultimately just a schematic that will show you the process flow of how and when things will happen as you go down this road of becoming a data furnisher. So feel free to go to the handout section of the webinar, and if you're struggling with downloading it, that's okay. We will, Madison has both of these guides available to you to help you get started. So with that, we have gotten some questions throughout the session here. Let me pull them up, and I will get them ready to ask and get answered. Okay, Jen, so why don't I fire off these questions, and either you and I can answer them. The first one I think will be very easy for you to answer. Here's the first question. If I hire a third-party company to convert my files to Metro 2 and report them to Equifax, does that alleviate or eliminate my liability or risk?
Hi, Angelica. Yeah, no, it does not. Certainly, there's many companies out there that have a lot of expertise in this area, but ultimately, you want to make sure that you are auditing and you have oversight into what obviously your third party or your vendor is doing. So definitely encourage you to make sure that you're keeping an eye on your accounts.
Okay, great. Here's another one. Is it necessary or a requirement to register with eOscar?
Yes, so obviously we would like to say, hey, yes, it's a requirement because it is a requirement that you respond to your disputes. So I definitely would highly encourage everybody to go ahead and get that registered if you do not, because that is going to be the way that we communicate with you. So if you're not registered, definitely go register.
Okay, great. Here's another one. How do we go about disclosing to our current customers that we will now be reporting to the credit bureau?
That's obviously something you'll want to make sure that you kind of talk with your legal counsel on, and you likely want to just have their guidance as it relates to disclosing. But one thing I would say is you want to make sure that you're very transparent about it, and that it's something that's talked about through the process. But as it relates to how you ultimately do that, I definitely would seek out some advice from just your attorney as it relates to that.
Excellent. Thank you. What about older accounts? Are they required to be reported as well, or only current accounts?
So the requirement that we have, and this is something that you would work with your data analyst to select, is you have to basically report your entire portfolio. Now you're going to work with your data analyst to determine whether you just go forward from the date that you submit versus going backwards. But that's a discussion you'll want to have with your data analyst when you go and get to that stage of the process.
Okay, excellent. How can we access the recorded webinar? That's a good question. Nabil, you can email me afterwards, and I will get the recording for you. So, and I think, and to be honest with you, this is new software for us. I think what happens is it automatically gets sent out to you guys. But in any case, if you would like a copy of the recorded webinar, we will make it available to you. But feel free to email me directly, and I will be happy to send it out to you. Okay, here's another one. Is there a third-party vendor that reports to all 3 credit reporting agencies so you don't have to register with each individual agency?
There's certainly providers out there that can send the file to each of the agencies, so you don't have to do that separately. My understanding is, though, you'll likely need to reach out to each of the agencies and become credentialed or authorized to go through each one of those processes. But certainly from an Equifax perspective, you get credentialed directly with us, but then you can use a third party to send the file. But my understanding is you'll likely need to establish relationships with those other 2 initially.
Okay. And we'll wait another second because that completes the questions that we already have coming in. Okay, here we go with another one. Are you required to report to the other credit reporting agencies?
No, there is no requirement that says you have to report to other credit reporting agencies.
Right, so if you report to one, you don't necessarily have to report to any of the others.
Correct.
Yep. Okay.
You just want to make sure it's consistent, whatever that it is you're doing. You want to make sure that your entire portfolio is going to wherever you report to. For example, you can't report to some and not the other.
In terms of the entire portfolio, right?
Correct.
Okay, let's give it another section. Is this only referring to buy her, pay her dealers? Well, buy her, pay, I'll answer that one. Buy her, pay her dealers would be lenders in this case, and so subsequently, if you have records that you're keeping on customers that are making payments to you as a lender or a buy here, pay here dealer, then yes, this would only apply to you. Can you go back a page in the webinar to show the websites? Of course I can. Hold on a minute. Here they are. CDIA website, the eOscar, Equifax ePort. And again, for those of you who are able to download the handout, I believe all of those website addresses are in the handout as well. Here's another one. Are there any talks from other reporting agencies to lift minimum number of accounts for reporting as well?
We've been actively working with, obviously, the associations, and certainly I think this is something that's been on their radar. At this time, I'm not aware of discussions with the other two to be able to lift that, but that's definitely feedback that if that's something that you feel is important, would definitely make sure you filter that through your local association.
Okay. Here's another one. If we are just reporting data to Equifax, not pulling reports, is there a monthly charge, or is the data furnishing a free service?
The way that we have the program set up is we don't have a minimum charge specifically for the Tradeline reporting. However, depending on the size, that automatic data view that we mentioned within the presentation is $50 monthly, and that's something that we have with the program. So that your investment per month is you're looking at about $50 per month.
Okay, that's actually pretty reasonable. There's another question here. I'm going to read it, Jen. We might need to collaborate on to what this question means. It says, what do you mean by buy here, pay here, take the car back? With this, we cannot and file for charge off. I think that's a question on repossessions and can they report repossessions as part of their data furnishing.
Yeah, what I would suggest is using the CDIA guide. It outlines things such as repossessions, voluntary surrenders, modifications. So it gives you the different scenarios and kind of what codes and what to use in those different scenarios. So I definitely would use that guide to sort of guide you through that process and the different instances. One of the things I will stress is that, this segment, obviously you can have a lot of different scenarios that can play out. One of the things we stress again is having a procedure or policy in place and documented and making sure you're following it consistently. So you're not doing one-off things for different customers and that you're treating everybody fairly and consistently. And if you find yourself, if you've got a documented policy and procedure and you find yourself doing things outside of that documentation and on a fairly regular basis, you want to make sure you go ahead and incorporate that into your policies and procedures so that in the event you are audited or there's sort of somebody asks you to document it, you have that information available and you can show that you have a procedure in place.
Excellent. Okay. There's a question here that asks, how much is the Metro 2 software? I'm not sure I remember, but do you remember, Jen? I think it's $200 or $300.
There's, it depends if you go specifically with the Metro 2. Many of the DMSs have it available, so there's different costs out there, but it can range. But yes, it's very inexpensive from a year perspective. But I definitely encourage you to work with or ask your DMS service providers first, because then oftentimes it's available at no charge or small charge.
Right. They have it built right into their system so that they can convert the data you've already put in there into a Metro 2 and feed it back to you. So very convenient for sure. Okay, I think that wraps up our questions today. And guys and gals, if you have any further questions, we're here to help. We want to thank you once again for your time and attention, and hopefully this webinar was helpful for you. We have Madison's contact information again up here for you to get started. She will email you all the forms that you will need to get your member number started and the entire process going, and work with you to get your files perfected and uploaded to our system. Thank you very much. Jen, any final comments?
No, thanks everybody for joining us today, and certainly know that this is something that's been an important initiative for Equifax. And we're definitely in very close lockstep with our partners at NIADA and NABD. So great channels that you can contact us directly at the contacts we provided, or certainly through your state association as well. So thanks again for making the